MAID is when the pain of is more than the fear of death. How do you shut out the switch to both emotional and physical pain in poverty? And if poverty takes somebody in a wheelchair and basically makes them homeless, what's the solution? I don't want to go homeless. I don't want to end up living in a van until I can't make the van payments. I don't want to end up homeless. I mean, who would want to be homeless at 16, never mind 65? With the health issues. I mean, like, why don't you do 20 below in a wheelchair? Before I turned 65, I was livable. I wasn't suffering, but I had my budget set out. I knew exactly how much I was going to get, and it was manageable. Now it's like I don't know what I'm going to get from month to month. By the numbers that I've seen since July, I've been getting less every month. So sooner or later, it's going to get to the point where I just won't be able to afford to live. Won't be able to afford the lifestyle that I have. I could always pull out at any time. So I sent in the application, and it's like check out. It's almost like a multiple questions. Just check off the boxes and sign the bottom. I mean, the MAID application itself is just like, it is bizarre. You have to find an independent witness that will verify. I mean, some people are uncomfortable doing that, but I managed to find an independent witness. She signed it and sent it in. And within a matter of 10 days, I can't, I'd have to look through the emails. I believe I sent you a copy of them. But in a matter of days, I mean, I got a response saying that they're going to get a hold, like we're going to move on to the next step. And I've been very honest with it through the whole process. I haven't lied or hidden anything. I said, I am on the fence here. I said, but one of the main factors is because of the poverty. And I explained on age that poverty wasn't an issue. I knew I could budget. I knew that I was loud. I knew it was covered. And I said, now everything's up in the air, and it's the unknown. Like, he didn't hold anything back with me either. He said that he knows he has admitted MAID to people based on poverty, but they didn't tell. Why would it take 20 months to assist killing us, and like forever to try and improve our benefits?
Economic reason behind this particular policy, because what we're going to talk about is why Canada has created a solution for its poor and disabled that includes something that they call MAID, which is essentially that you can ask for a doctor to end your life. And what you want to ask yourself is that, what is the economic policy behind this? What's the economic reason behind this particular policy as we get ready to go into this next video? Because I think if you're not looking at the economic reason behind this particular policy, you may miss why the actual policy is taking place, right? So let's get ready to go into this next video, and we're going to continue to kind of get deeper into this particular issue, because I think that this may be something that could be the future of not only what's going on in Canada, but also the future of what's going on inside the United States. And we've always had where you can ask to end your life if you have what we call a terminal illness. But what you're seeing in Canada is where they're combining this with poverty, right? To where they're making it easier for you to ask to be taken off the planet because you're poor and disabled, as opposed to coming up with a solution for your funding because you're poor and disabled. And this is something that people really want to start looking into, because we're in an environment where if you don't have the financial wherewithal, the financial means, you're dependent upon the state to take care of you as you get older and if you're disabled. What happens when the state decides, well, you're no longer worth it to take care of, right? And then what do you do in that situation? And what we're seeing is that people in Canada are being faced with this, and there's no acute solution to the problem. They can't wait until legislation passes, 20, 30 years down the line if they have an immediate issue. And this is something I think people really don't understand. So let's get into this next video, and we're going to get up and out of here as far as videos.
Hello, you've reached the Provincial Health Services Authority telephone line for medical assistance in dying.
The countdown to Joni Cowie's death has begun.
Your call is important to us.
If you call the number on the government website, they will provide doctors that will sign off for you.
Like many disabled Canadians, she is stuck in a cycle of poverty and despair.
There's no hope for anybody in Ontario. That's a good boy.
So she's planning to end her life
Up.
with the government's help.
They can have me dead in 90 days. That's what I was told.
Like in my case, the problem is not really the disability. It is the poverty.
Les Landry is in the same position, wanting to live, but seeing no other option than death.
These two are for my asthma. This is for my COPD. Since when did we stop looking at the value of human life in this country?
It's a question people with disabilities and their advocates ask constantly.
We can organize medical assistance in dying in approximately 2 weeks in a very organized and efficient manner. Yet it is so difficult to get my patients the social support that they need to live well. That is morally distressing.
From her home in Windsor, Ontario, Joni deals with the grinding financial pain of living in poverty during an affordability crisis, compounded by the physical pain of disability.
I have severe asthma that's turned into COPD and Guillain-Barré syndrome, as well as cancer. I also just recently fractured my back. I'm tired a lot. The pain is excruciating. He told me.
Joni lives with her 3 dogs and her daughter, who is also disabled. They have no family support, so they have to find a way to survive on $1,228 a month Joni gets from Ontario's Disability Support Program, plus a few $100s more for her daughter. Even with subsidized housing, it's not nearly enough.
We have about $59 left to buy groceries in a month because our home, we have to have housing insurance, rent, hydro is high, gas is high. I get angry at people who say you need to budget better because I just want to say to them, go to hell. I really do. And I don't swear very often.
Here's the thing. Joni's financial struggle is not at all unique. During the pandemic, the government decided working Canadians needed at least $2,000 a month to live, while the disabled were forced to get by on much less.
They had CERB, but not for people with disabilities. People with disabilities have been put on the back burner and nobody gives a damn about them.
Disability support.
Okay, so that is an alternative story to somebody else in Canada dealing with the same situation. And we saw that during the pandemic, is that people with disabilities, either did not get an increase or actually had their support cut. And we want to try to ask ourselves, is this like a flash into the future of what's going to happen not only in Canada, but also in the United States? Because when you talk about Canada, one of the things that people used to always say is that they have great social support. They have great social networks to take care of people. But we understand that comes with a price, right? To be able to take care of people using a social safety net, there's an economic cost involved with that. And we want to ask ourselves, what is the economic reason behind this policy? And many times, because we're really not well versed in economics, we don't necessarily understand the economic reasons behind certain policies. And let me clue people in to like an economic reality, right? That a lot of people may not be aware of or may not be familiar with. If you are a certain, regardless of your age, let's just put it on a foundational level. If you exist in an economic system and you don't produce anything, but you consume goods and services, do you know that you raise the rate of inflation? Because we have more dollars chasing goods and services that don't get produced, right? And people look at it from a standpoint of, well, it's just the poor people that are doing that. But what you have to understand is that we live in a country to where we have essentially a longer lifespan than a lot of other countries, right? Because of our medical system. So we have a longer lifespan than a lot of other countries. And then we're telling people, well, at this age, you're going to be able to stop working. And you're going to live off money from a pension, from a 401k, from money saved, whatever. But that person is no longer producing goods and services in our economy, but their dollars are chasing goods and services in our economy, which does what? It increases inflation. So as we continue to expand our population of older people who no longer work, so they no longer produce goods and services, but their dollars are chasing goods and services, that increases inflation. And there's nothing that you can do about that unless you get rid of the people who's either you get rid of them or you put them to work. So if you look at places like South Korea works their elderly. You could be 70 years old in South Korea, you're still working because they've decided from a government policy standpoint that makes sense for us. In America, to keep the worker content, what we told them is that Well, once you get this age, you're going to quit working. But when they came up with that plan, many people didn't live 10 years past they start working. So a lot of people stop working in their mid 60s and they lived at best another 10 years. We're now entering an age. I saw a commercial on television the other day. They were saying that like young people that are under, like I want to say 10 years old, may live to 150 years old because of the American medical system, because of our nutrition, things of that nature. Therefore, we're now trying to figure out how do we keep people around longer, but how does it work in an economic system where if you if you retire at 65, but you live north of 100 years old, those dollars are still chasing goods and services that are no longer being produced by this segment of the population. And therefore, we're going to have to restructure our society based on that, right? Because the way it was structured initially was to make the worker content with working until they got 65 by believing that there's going to be this big payoff and that I'm going to be able to just kick back until I pass away. But as we started being able to combat major diseases, our nutrition is a lot better. Our healthcare system is a lot better. It starts increasing the lifespan of people. And this is what people can't talk about because they don't understand economic situations, because we live in a society to where K through 12, you get one semester of economics, right? And they don't understand that we have a segment of our population. They always talk about poor people, but we don't talk about our older people, who many have been told you don't have to work past this age and you're supposed to aspire to not work past a certain age. That's supposed to be the big dream, is once I get a certain age, I'll no longer work. Well, when everybody does that, and we have a large segment of our population that does that, but their dollars are still chasing goods and services, the problem is that creates inflation, that it creates an inflationary effect. And so then the whole society has to deal with inflation because of what? We have a segment of our population that no longer produces goods and services, but their dollars are chasing after goods and services. So this is one of the reasons why we sent all our manufacturing overseas. So the people that are in this country can afford what's being manufactured. Most people don't understand the amount of plates they've had to spend to keep this form of capitalism going, because it really doesn't work anymore. And it really doesn't work the way they said it was supposed to work. But because they don't want to do anything else, they have to figure out all these ways of making sure that we can keep this going just a little bit longer until we come up with something else. And what I think you're seeing in Canada is they've decided that, you know what, it makes more economic sense for us to take this segment of the population and to just eliminate them. Because why? They're a strain on our economy because they're not producing, right? They're not producing, but their dollars are still chasing goods and services. And then that's money that we can be using in other areas for people that are not producing anything. And they're going to need what? More care as they get older. You know, if you have a major debilitating disease, or you have a major illness and you're at a certain age, it may not get better as you get older. You may need more care. You may need more dollars to support you as you get older. And so the problem is that, do we still have this financial wherewithal to continue to support that? And that's what I want people to really understand, that there's an economic reason behind this Canadian policy. They're not just doing it because they're mean people. They've come up with an economic rationale behind doing this, because in reality, if you are living in a society and you're not producing any goods or services, but your dollars are chasing goods and services, you're contributing to inflation, right? Just regular supply side inflation, right? Well, we have a lack of supply, but we got more dollars chasing those goods. But we've taught everybody in America, the dream is to get to a certain age and don't work anymore. You know, all of this 401k millionaires, that's the dream, right? The challenge is that as people continue to live longer and longer, that particular plan is no longer going to be practical, right? One, you're going to outlive your 401k. Two, you're going to be living so long without producing any goods or services that the money that you do have is going to continue to contribute to inflation. That's why I think this idea of 2% inflation is a fool's dream. I don't think that we're ever going to get back to 2% inflation, but that is another economic conversation, right? And they have to figure out what to do about that. So we're going to get into what I'm talking about, right? Because I believe that what we're seeing is a glimpse into the future, not only for Canada, but for America and for any what we call first world country where they've been able to figure out how to make their older generation live longer because of advances in healthcare, but at the same time telling people that you're supposed to get to this age and quit working, and that's supposed to be the big dream, and then you retire on your 401k until you pass away. But when they started that plan, people at best were living maybe 10 years past their retirement age. Now people are living 25 and 30, some even 40. My grandmother passed away at 92 years old. She started working in her 60s, right? She was on government support because of her income from the time she was 60 something until she was 92. So she was utilizing government resources as an older person almost 30 years after her retirement. They didn't build that plan that way. They built it for her to last maybe 10 more years. But because of advances in healthcare, she took really good care of herself. She was blessed by God. She lived until she was 92. But when she was born, people weren't living until they were 92 unless they were rich, right? When my grandmother was born in the early 1900s, right? So you have to understand is that we're in a different economic situation. And I think a lot of people, because they can't understand economic policy, they're not able to talk about it. And I think that's going to hurt them. When this starts to touch them or their family, they may not understand what's going on because there's been an economic decision made somewhere and they're not even aware of it. And it's going to get very much politicized. People are going to take both sides of the issue. But in reality, this is an economic decision. It has nothing to do with politics, right? It's about trying to figure out how to not put the society in a position where we can no longer fund ourselves because we're taking care of people that are no longer producing goods and services in our society. And we just don't have the ability to do it. Let's keep going into the particular presentation, right? Because we're not going to be here long. So it is my opinion, right, that we're entering into a space where 15 to 30 will be the high point for the majority of the population. And we see this with a lot of what I call low income areas. If you go to a lot of lower income areas, you see that a lot of people are washed up once they get over 30. Why? Because they lived a life so hard between 15 and 30, and they didn't do anything to support themselves past their youth. And you see this in a lot of low income areas where, you know, people are 35, 40 years old. They look way, way older because of how they live their life. And I think we're entering into a space in our environment where the high point of life for a lot of people is going to be 15 to 30 years old. And once you get over 30, essentially your life is just going to be washed up because there's going to be nothing else for you past that, right? And we're already kind of seeing that with our younger generation to where they don't want to get older, right? But they also don't want to die young. You know, so they don't want to be adults at 24, 25 years old, but they also don't want to die at 30. So they're stuck in this weird era where, like when I was coming up, we wanted to be grown at 16. We're now dealing with a younger contingent where they don't even want to be adults until north of 25 years old, right? And so we're in this weird space, but I think that we're going to enter into an era to where for the majority of the population, their best years are going to be between 15 and 30. And once they get 30, because of the economic situations that we're going to be in, their life's just going to do this, right? They're going to just go downhill because now the economic reality is going to hit them. And then in those particular, in that reality is going to be, well, I can't provide for myself. I can't really support myself because I spent 15 to 30 just living life. And then the government's going to come in and say, well, we have these solutions for you. One may be just the metaverse, just, you know, plug out or plug into the metaverse and, you know, and just essentially be in a coma the rest of your life. But at least you're not consuming goods and services in our economy. And this is what I want people to understand because they have to figure out what to do with all these people who are not productive, right? They can't incarcerate all of them, right? They have to figure, and incarcerated people use resources, right? So you can use less resources. What can we do to where you're not a pull on resources, right? What can we do? Where for a very long time, the government knew, well, you'll be dead at 45. So it really didn't matter because your lifespan is going to be so short. You'll be out of here 45, 50 years old. A lot of men for a very long time, most men died of a heart attack in their 50s. Why? Because they worked so hard. So one of the reasons why they combated heart disease for so long, because for a very long time inside the United States, a lot of men died of heart disease in their 50s. Why? Because they worked so hard. They smoked, they drank, they didn't really have good exercise, they didn't have a good diet, and they worked extremely hard to support their family. So when they got around 50 to 60 years old, they just died of a massive heart attack. And that's how you got rid of that segment of the population. And then we restarted all over again. Now, because of advances in healthcare, you don't have those same men dying of heart attacks at 55, 60. They're now living longer. We're able to deal with a lot of these heart conditions. But the problem, once again, is that you have this group of your people that are no longer producing goods and services, but their dollars are chasing goods and services. And you got to come up with a solution for that. And we have to get the population to buy into it so they continue to contribute to the society. We can't make it to where everybody goes against it. So to get everybody to buy into the industrial age, what do they tell everybody? Well, you just work hard, you retire at 65, and then you can just live off your pension. Then that changed into the 401k process. But the problem again is that people are living way longer than people expected people to live 50 years ago. Nobody expected people to be living this long 50 years ago. And in 50 more years, people are going to literally be living to 150, almost 200 years old. And they don't have a solution to that problem, right? So let's get into the next one, right? Would an emergency fund solve this problem? And it's something I want to talk about, because one of my critiques of a lot of financial planning is it doesn't deal with the reality of life. It deals with this ideal case, right? This ideal case. It doesn't deal with the reality of life. And so one of the things that the woman talked about in the video is a lot of people said, well, you could support yourself if you just budgeted, because you hear this from these financial planners all the time. If you just budget, you can support yourself. You can't if enough money's not coming in. If you're making $25,000 a year, budgeting isn't going to help you because you don't make enough money. With rent being on average $1,700 a month, for rent to be 1/3 of your take-home pay, you got to be making $60,000 a year. If you're making $35,000 a year, there's no way you can budget to 60 grand a year because you only make 30. You can't create an output where input doesn't exist. That's just basic electrical engineering. People being told, well, emergency funds could solve this problem for a lot of these people. The challenge is, and we're going to go into the article, is if there's no input, you can't create the output. And let's get into it, right? So here's the article about that man, right? Guy says, I don't want to die. I don't want to be homeless. Canadian man, 65 years old, has doctor's approval for euthanasia despite admitting that being poor is the main reason he's applying to die. So a doctor approved Les Landsley's application for medical assistance in dying, despite him saying poverty is a major factor in the decision to end his own life. Okay? So a Canadian pensioner seeking euthanasia because he fears homelessness has received approval from a doctor despite admitting that poverty, right, is a major factor in the decision to end his life. Les Landry, 65, told assessors for the procedure he doesn't want to die, but he's applied for medical assistance in dying because he can't afford to live comfortably. So the shocking case bears increasingly relaxed approach to euthanasia in Canada, where experts say choosing to die is more accessible than support for people with disabilities, right? Then Dr. Nasheed, a palliative care physician and assistant professor at University of Toronto, said Canada has reached a point where people are choosing to die, not because they want to, but because they don't have adequate access to proper health care and services. And this is Canada, where their support system is supposed to be very robust compared to the United States. Landry uses a wheelchair and has several other disabilities, which means he's eligible for MAID, including epilepsy and diabetes. But until recently, he was able to live comfortably with a modest home in Alberta with his service dog. Changes to his state benefits started when he turned 65, which meant his income was cut, and now he's left with around $120 per month after paying for medical bills and essentials. He's braced for a rent hike in January. That could mean his benefits no longer cover the cost of essentials, putting him on the brink of homelessness. So once we go back again, people saying that you can budget your way through this. You can't budget if your input, right, doesn't equal your output, right? You can't take money that doesn't exist and make it into more money at the end of the day. So if they're cutting his money because he turned 65, but his rent is going up, there may not be any place in the budget to cut to cover the shortfall in the rent, right? There may not be the fact that, well, you have an emergency fund. Well, emergency fund is designed to last a certain amount of time. Once the emergency fund is exhausted, now what do you do? And these are the kind of questions, like I said, a lot of financial planning is based on an ideal case scenario. To me, financial planning should be based on when everything falls apart. Because part of managing life is managing the downside, not managing the ideal case, right? So what's the worst case scenario that we could talk about? How do we manage that as opposed to just managing the ideal case scenario, right? Let me keep going down. So before he turned 65, I was livable. I wasn't suffering. I had my budget all set out. I know exactly how much money I was going to get. It was manageable. Now I don't know what I'm going to get from month to month. Sooner or later, it's going to get to a point where I just won't be able to afford to live. Now, many people will say that, well, he should have prepared for this. He was a commercial truck driver earning around $85,000 a year, which he was earning way more than the average American. He suffered a hernia 15 years ago, and complications with the treatment left him with high blood pressure. The high blood pressure triggered 3 mini strokes, and he developed epilepsy, a series of events that meant he lost his driver's license and was unable to work, right? He was recently receiving around $1,680 a month, plus other benefits, including the service dog, meal transportation allowance, and special diet allowance. But after turning 65, he was switched to a different plan for senior citizens, and many of those benefits were cut. So his finances are now in decline, and the threat of homelessness is actually real for him, right? Many people will say, well, he should have prepared more early on, but he was working and he had a medical emergency or a medical accident, and it put him in a position where he could not work, right? And that's what I want people to understand is many Americans are one medical emergency away from being financially ruined. And a lot of financial planning is to hope it just never happens to you. But we know that people get sick every day. People get in car accidents every day. All kind of things happen, right? But you have to understand, this was not a guy who was not gainfully employed. He wasn't a productive person in the society. But what happened was he had a medical emergency, which turned into other medical emergencies. And we're going to kind of talk about that because I think that people don't really understand, and I do because I worked in healthcare, how detrimental a medical emergency can be to somebody, right? And we created this society in America where you're just supposed to go through life and just hope it doesn't happen to you, right? That's really what you're supposed to do because you really can't prepare for it because then you got to start dealing with the economic reality. But many people can't even have the conversation about it because they can't have the economic conversation. And we see this in the chat. When we start having an economic conversation, people's mind starts to wander because they can't have the conversation on the topic. And that's a challenge for a lot of people. And that's going to hurt a lot of people because they're not able to really understand what is my economic reality. Because once again, we put certain topics on the table, people psychologically can't lock in on the topic. You know what I'm saying? You got to lock in on the problem to solve the problem. We can't get distracted from what the problem is. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of people. We've created this world to where everything is more entertaining or more interesting than what is the problem on the table, right? And that can come back to haunt you or bite you in the ass later on because you won't deal with the problem that's on the table, right? And I think that's a challenge for a lot of people. We're going to continue to go into that. So would emergency funds solve the problem? Let me show you some other examples, right? So I know y'all know who this guy is, right? Chadwick Boseman, he played in Black Panther, okay? Now, Chadwick Boseman got sick relatively early in life, right? He was around late 30s and he was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer, okay? Now, what you got to understand is that he died with a net worth or in the state around $2 million. That's great. Most people are not going to die with $2 million net worth. The problem is that that's not all the money in the world, especially in America, especially on the West Coast, okay? But that's not all the money in the world. And what you want to understand is that when he got sick, when he got diagnosed with colon cancer, he was not at a place financially where he no longer had to work again. So what did he have to do? He kept working. There was no emergency fund to where he could take 5 years off and just deal with his colon cancer issue. So we found out after he passed that he was going through treatment, right, and still doing Black Panther. And if you look at his discography, right, you look at his discography, right, look at 42, Draft Day, Get On Up, 9 Kisses, Gods of Egypt. He did a bit role in Civil War, Message from the King, Thurgood Marshall. Then he did Black Panther 2018. He was diagnosed with colon cancer in 2016. He never had a movie to where it was a big blockbuster hit, to where he was so financially stable to where once he got diagnosed with colon cancer, he could stop working and just deal with his treatment. So what did he do? He kept working throughout his treatment. A 6-month, 1-year emergency fund would not have solved that problem for him. Why? Because I have to keep working. If he would have quit working, he would have fell under. Even though he was a Hollywood actor, he had credits, he was making decent money, but because of the treatment he was under, he couldn't quit working, and there was no way I got a 5-year emergency fund. So when you're going to a financial plan that's saying you get 6 months to a year, that's great. Emergency fund, something is better than nothing. The challenge is that if you have something that's in a medical emergency where it's going to be long-term, like colon cancer, where you have to continue to get treatment, you're going to have to figure out how to work and still get treatment. You may not be in a situation where I can sit home for the next 4 years and just get treatment. And that's what I want people to understand. A lot of financial planning is based around the best case scenario. I got a year of money sitting up and I'm not going to get sick. Well, what if you do get sick? Would a year of money be enough for you not to have to go to work while you get your treatment? Can your job, will they keep you on the job if you take a year off? Because what if you take a year off of work and they say, well, you know what, that you're fired because you can't not work for a year, right? Now what happens? Now you're going to need more than a year's worth of emergency fund because now you got to go find another job. So you got to deal with the stress of your illness and you got to deal with the stress of the fact that you got to not find another job.